Hi there, Doug. Again, here to talk about Blitzy and autonomous code creation. I've worked in developer relations for over 20 years, and one of the critical roles that I've played is creating documentation for projects. And I've come into projects that have been years old. No one has touched the docs for years. And we've all seen GitHub repos where we go in and we want to contribute, but the code's a mess and there's no comments in it. And you don't even really know where to start. And you have to spend a lot of time working through the code and figuring out how it all works because there's just the people who wrote it didn't leave their thoughts as comments into the code. And that's a big issue for enterprises because if the developer leaves and a new developer comes in, do they have to spend weeks and months figuring out how the code base works? If you've got an open source project, how do you get new contributors if they can't figure out what's going on in the code? Blitzy has a solution for that. Blitzy's agentic AI can go in and analyze your code and understand how your code works. And you can have it add documentation or add comments into the code. And in this video, we're going to walk through an example of where Blitzy has taken in an entire code base, analyzed it, understood how it works, and then created a complete documentation, a complete API spec, and added comments in the code so that as a new developer coming in, you know what's going on in each section of the code, you know how it works, and then you can contribute and help maintain the code as it exists today. Let's jump right in. Ardu is an open source project that can control drones, whether it's a fixed wing airplane, a helicopter, submarines, and uncrewed surface vessels. Like, it can do everything. It's a very popular repo. It's getting updated regularly. It's got 13,000 stars, hundreds of thousands of lines of code. When you get into it, you can see the README, and it's telling us how it all works and where you can get support and developer information and all of these sorts of things. And if we come over here, we can see we have Ardupilot, we've got Arduplane, Sub, Blimp, Rover, Tools. Let's look at the plane. We'll just open up that section. And we can see that we have a lot of files, how it all works, but the only text file is a release notes. And it's a good release notes. But how does all of this code work? It would take a lot of cognitive load to figure out how this application works. So what we've done is we've taken that GitHub repository and fed it into Blitzy. Blitzy has read in the entire code base and came up with a technical specification talking about how Ardupilot works. We can see it's a very long document and it describes everything in detail how Ardupilot works. The next step is we can build, and we want to document our code. So we want to auto comment the code and create module README guides for each module inside Ardupilot. When we click document code, it's going to ask us for the prompt. So here is the prompt from Ardupilot. So what we're asking it to do is create comprehensive documentation to this code base. We want specific code for the copter, the plane, the rover, the sub, the antenna tractor, the antenna tracker. Look at the libraries. What's the current state of the documentation? It points to that external wiki, and then it walks through. There isn't great inline code documentation. So we want to create all of that. We want a detailed API. We want module level guides for each major directory. We want to talk about the architecture, the usage, and the integration. We want API. We want safety documentation, architectural documentation. And this is for folks who are getting started, right? How can you get started if you don't know what the heck is going on and you don't, this is the onboarding documentation. How can a hardware manufacturer create drones that work with Ardupilot if they don't understand how it all works, right? So this is all this great content that will be very useful for the Ardupilot community. So we're going to focus on what boundaries, what components should they focus on, what should we not touch? Don't mess with the code. We're not changing the code at all. Don't change the APIs. What we're doing is we're creating markdown for the README files. param tags for parameters. We're going to, insert, here's some examples of what the inline code should look like. And, tell us what the algorithm does. What can you do to make sure this is all safe? We're flying drones, for goodness sakes. What's required here? So walking through what should be in all the guides, right? This is a detailed prompt that's telling Blitzy how to create the documentation. So after we give it that prompt, Blitzy reads that prompt and comes up with what needs to be done. And it comes up with this documentation objective. Here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to do it. We're going to create all of these documentation. Here's what it's going to look like. And as a developer, you can look through this and make sure, yeah, this is the documentation we want. These are the things that we want added. And then when we're ready, you start the build process. And this build took a while. It ended up, let's look at the PR that was generated after we were ready. Once we approved this future technical specification, we had Blitzy run and create the documentation. And it created a PR. So let's look at that PR and see what we got. Now, if we got this PR, and if you look, there's 765 commits, 700 files were changed, and even GitHub is like, this is a big PR. We're only showing 250 commits. There's a lot that happened here, right? In every module, there were comments added, and there was a lot of documentation added. And what that does is it just makes the Ardupilot application a lot more accessible to the community. So I'm going to walk through a couple of the files. I mean, obviously there's 700 files. This would be a monster PR to merge, but it would just require a review of the comments that were added. And so if the developers for each one of the modules could look at it, they could merge that in probably fairly quickly. Let's start off with looking at just at Ardupilot. If you remember earlier in the video, there wasn't a docs section. That's huge, right? If we look at the docs section, we've got the architecture, the config, the flight mode, safety systems, and we have a whole API section. But also now we have a README inside the plane, the Ardupilot. And this is the same for Copter, for Antenna Tractor, for the rover, for all of them. There's a README, there's docs, and there's API specifications, right? This is huge. We're making this a lot more accessible. So if we look at the README, it's talking about what Ardupilot does. It's for fixed wing and vertical takeoff planes. And it walks through everything that happens. It has here the features, here's the architecture. This is a very detailed README. For someone coming in who's new, this can help them get up to speed very, very quickly, right? We've got navigation controllers, the architecture for flight mode, vertical takeoff and landing, navigation, right? We've got a lot going on here with our integration guides, a lot of information to get people started in building or working with Ardupilot. If we come in here and start looking at the docs, we've got the architectural document. What is this? What are the architectural principles? What are the patterns? What are the components? We've got some flow charts. What are the classes? What are the flight mode categories? We've got manual, assisted, autonomous, VTOL. How they all connect together. How does navigation work? Detailed documents to help you understand the architecture of Ardupilot. We've got the flight modes, right? All the different flight modes and how they work with some sample code on how to use them. And then finally, you can get into the API and you can look at the core, the vehicle API reference. And it walks through the constructors and all of the parameters, right? You can set the modes. You can set navigation, update the navigation with examples of how to do all of this so that you can begin building. You can start building your own. You can start building with Ardupilot, or you can start updating Ardupilot to do what needs to be done for your specific implementation. None of this exists in the original code. So this is a very powerful addition. Going back, we have a configuration guide. Here's the overview. What are the parameters? Flight control, navigation, takeoff and landing. These are all probably pretty important if you're flying a drone, right? Here's the way you can code all of this into your own device. Safety documentation. How does it all work? How does it keep you safe? So we've got safety documentation, fail-safe modes, but now it's documented. So it's easier to find and easier to understand what's going on inside the application. Now with this, we've gone through the documentation, right? These are the docs that were created, walking through how the product, how Ardupilot works. But there was also comments added into the code. And so what I want to do is a side-by-side of just one of the files. And remember, there's 700 files that were changed in this PR. Let's just look at one of them side by side to see the difference. So this is the AP arming plane file. And I picked it because it's the first one. It's the first code file in the Ardupilot directory. And so here's the original. This is what this is what it looks like in Ardupilot today. This is the one where Blitzy has added comments. You can see right off the top what's going on here. This module implements fixed wing arming and safety validation system, extending the base AP arming with plane specific checks. And it walks through what it is. It doesn't say who wrote it because it may not know. And it walks through, here's some links and some sources and all of that. But as we walk through, we can see there's documentation for each one of these steps. And if you look over here, additional arming checks for plane. If we look on the original for the pre-armed checks for arming the plane, the comment says additional arming checks for plane. In the Blitzy version, we've got 35 lines of documentation. What's going on? Here are 10 of them. Here are the critical safety parameters. A little bit more informational than that. We can come down to another one here. Let's look at the quad plane checks. No comments and 30-ish lines of comments as to what's going on. So if you're a new developer or someone who's just started in, this is going to help you contribute to Ardupilot faster. Now that's great for open source repositories because open source maintainers are always looking for more people to come in and help. But think about this in the enterprise. We all know there's spaghetti code and code that's really hard to understand inside your enterprise today. And we've all seen the code that has negligible documentation. And maybe the developer who created it knows exactly how it works, but that's great for that developer. If they leave or another developer comes on to help, how do they understand it without hours, days, weeks of studying the code? By adding the documentation using Blitzy, we've added all of the context right in the code so a developer can say, what does this do? Oh, I can read these 30 lines and understand what's going on. The code becomes more clear, it becomes less opaque, and your developers can get started faster. So when you onboard new developers, things go faster. If there's a bug, there's not like, what does that one do? What does that variable do? You can find it. It's in the documentation. So as somebody who's written documentation for a very long time, this is super powerful. There's nothing worse than coming to a GitHub repo and seeing the last time the docs were updated was like 5 years ago. If you can create some documentation, even if it's just a starting point, this is a great way to get your code documented, to build documentation around your code that's super thorough, to get your team on board faster. We're really excited about this feature here at Blitzy, and stay tuned to this channel to see more things that you can do with Blitzy, whether it's documentation or code creation. Thanks for watching.